Note that this episode contains discussion of racial violence that some people may find disturbing. Please take care of yourself.
Across humanity, stories witness us, and through them we see, we hear, and we grow. I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Peter Rizzi, and this is Book Feels, a podcast about how books made us feel and how we feel about books.
So today we'll be talking about Holes, which is a young adult novel published in 1998 by Louis Sachar. It centers around Stanley Yelnats, who is wrongfully convicted of stealing and subsequently sent to Camp Green Lake, a juvenile corrections facility. There he meets an interesting cast of characters, including sadistic camp counselors, a menacing warden, and other troubled quote-unquote inmates. One of these inmates is Zero, whose fate is mysteriously tied to Stanley's. Stanley's story is also intertwined with two other stories from the past, the first being of his ancestor, Elia Yelnats, who originated the Yelnats family curse that Stanley is under, and the second being of Kissing Kate Barlow, a notorious outlaw who robbed Stanley's great-grandfather. So, Peter, how do you feel about this book? What was your relationship to it?
I think I first read Holes as a 12-something, 13-something middle school boy, maybe even younger. It's a pretty easy read.
Yeah.
And I don't think at the time I really saw how much was behind this book. I just thought it was a fun story because it is a fun story. It is a really magical, fun story about a bunch of, I guess maybe 15-year-old boys, but not that far off from 11, 12-year-old something boys I was reading at the time who, even though they were kind of like at this juvenile correction facility doing manual labor all day, there's an element of like, this could be kind of fun. Like they're having a fun time being together. So that's kind of how I remember it, is just as a story. And then obviously in this more recent read of it, really uncovering that there's a lot to this story.
Yeah, it's complex. There's a lot of different themes that felt more complicated than I would. I also read it when I was kind of young, and I don't remember thinking it was something you could actually analyze, but there's a lot going on in it.
And I think the author kind of throws us off that scent by making the characters in this story very silly. They all have silly names and nicknames. And
Stanley Yelnats.
Right. It's the same forwards and backwards, but there's a lot more underneath the surface that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it.
Pauline, we loved this book. We really enjoyed rereading Holes. It's such a good story. And I think one of the reasons we loved it so much is it feels like a classic battle of good versus evil. The book begins with Stanley Yelnats, who, again, good versus evil. He's an innocent teenage convict. He's been convicted of stealing these expensive shoes and is being shipped away to a prison camp in the desert. And we learn more about this prison camp's origins through a story that happened about 110 years ago that is told alongside the story of today's Stanley Yelnats.
Yeah, so the story you're referring to, is a couple of generations above Stanley, and it centers around Catherine Barlow, also Kate. She goes by many names. She starts as a school teacher and becomes an outlaw because of the tragedy of her story. So what I found interesting, this ended up being a much more complex book than I think I gave it credit for.
Definitely.
Because, I liked it as a kid. And
didn't you say this funny thing that like the author only wrote this book because he thought the name Stanley Yelnats, which is the same backwards and forwards, was funny, and then he wrote this like amazing story.
And it's like, and it's actually quite complex, and it has like a lot of interesting ideas, and serves as a good example for kids. It's so interesting, but like I didn't expect there to be a racial element in the book, and
me either. Yeah,
and also for as you pointed out off mic earlier, that there's a racial hate crime that happens, and it's really disturbing and kind of realistic for the time period. So Kate is a school teacher. She is very pretty, and everybody has a crush on her, but she doesn't really like anybody. She's just kind of doing her thing. And there is a man who sells onions. His name is Sam. And importantly, he's Black. And Kate is white. And they develop a relationship with each other that becomes romantic by nature. And someone catches them kissing, and Sam is shot. And it's a really like
The
violent,
whole town riots.
Yeah, there's even a quote. I'm not going to pull it up exactly, but where the sheriff, like, they set fire to the schoolhouse, and Kate is trying to get the sheriff to help her, and the sheriff is drunk, and he said something like, "I always get drunk before hanging."
And the way this story ends is with Sam and Kate climbing into Sam's sort of like makeshift boat that he rows across back and forth from where he lives to the town to sell his onions. And this sort of wealthy townsperson named Trout Walker, who has been courting Kate, but Kate has no interest in, gets in his steamboat, and they track them down. And Sam loses his life, as you said, and Kate escapes.
Yeah, and this changes Kate. Like, I think she starts her storyline as a really gentle, smart woman who is strong but is not violent by any means, and then she becomes this notorious outlaw who kills men and leaves a kiss mark on their cheek when she kills them, and that's why she's called Kissin' Kate Barlow.
So this is the background of Camp Green Lake, where Stanley Yelnats, 110 years later, and what I guess is the 1990s, that's when this book was written, is now going to.
Yes.
And since this original tragedy, Camp Green Lake is no longer a lake. There's no longer a town. We learn later in the book that the lake is dried up. The whole area is stricken by drought. Trout Walker and his family lose all their money, and Stanley now arrives to this place, and the counselors have these boys digging holes, 5 foot wide, 5 foot deep holes all day long.
Yeah, and it's literally in a place that was born of hatred. It all stemmed from that event of an act of true evil, and now all these boys are suffering because of it.
The evil seeps into Camp Green Lake today, as you said. These counselors who are in charge of the camp, are in charge of the boys, are evil, awful people who abuse these boys. In particular, the warden, who is known just as the warden, it's a surprise to all the boys when they find out she's a woman, is a descendant of Trout Walker.
Yeah, I'd actually love to talk about Trout Walker a little more, because I found him to be a fascinating character, and also a gross individual, as I have told Peter many times. I just think he's gross. And I will just kind of pull up a quote about how, Kate is teaching all the adult men how to read. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many of the adults loved her as well. She was very pretty. Her classes were often full of young men who were a lot more interested in the teacher than they were in getting an education. One such man was Trout Walker. His real name was Charles Walker, but everyone called him Trout because his 2 feet smelled like a couple of dead fish. He often showed up at night school but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful to the students around him. He was loud and stupid, and he seemed proud of his stupidity. Just like kind of this like weird posturing, like masculinity that Trout exhibits. I don't think masculinity is evil, but I think this like toxic masculinity is the root of a lot of suffering. Similar to like kind of this theme of racism we've been talking about. And you really see how it affects everyone around them, and it affects generations later. Like when we are in a camp with these people who have nothing to do with like the original like characters in this storyline are suffering because of what they did and what happened to them.
This toxic masculinity shows up in today's, or, when we're reading the book, modern Camp Green Lake. Stanley Yelnats is a gentle giant. He's a big kid who gets bullied by a smaller kid at school back home, and none of his teachers believe him because he's 3 times bigger than his small bully. And he arrives at camp, meets these other boys who are also, juvenile delinquents and are kind of being punished here. And they all have these like nicknames for each other. There's Armpit and X-Ray and Squid, and they end up calling Stanley Caveman. And there's just a lot of like teenage boy posturing.
Yeah.
And Stanley is a really gentle soul, and he forms a relationship with someone among the boys who is very quiet, who everybody kind of picks on a little bit. His name is Zero. And that's both his nickname and kind of the given name that he shows up with. And he's named Zero because he essentially has no background.
Yeah.
No one knows where he came from. He was a homeless kid kind of on the streets, and I think Zero is kind of the name that he's given in this book because there's not much about him.
Yeah, and he's a sweet kid who's quiet, as you mentioned, and it's I don't know, Stanley treats him with kindness for the most part. There's one part in the book where he's a little colder with him, but only because he's tired, not because he's intentionally trying to be hurtful like some of the other characters are with Zero. And what I like about Holes is that it really gives a good example to children about, that like posturing and being, masculine in this toxic way, in this way that a lot of boys are pressured into being, is not going to help you. Like Trout didn't get the girl, and he ended up having a miserable life. Stanley ends up having a really happy ending, and so does Zero. And the other boys kind of stay at Camp Green Lake, unfortunately. I mean, we don't know what happens to them. But like the camp counselors also, like they have this weird masculine posturing that they do, and they kind of, get their comeuppance at the end. And, I think like the book doesn't really wrap up the same with like, the same conceptually with racism, just because I don't know. I don't know if this book was meant for that. I don't think it was trying to do that. But certainly in terms of the toxic masculinity, it really gives an example to young boys in particular on how to behave and like what actually is important in this world, which is being kind. And that's how you are strong, not by like hurting other people, which is what a lot of the other boys in this book do.
It's so true. And Zero and Stanley's relationship really develops. Zero kind of runs into the desert after a mishap with the other boys, with the counselors. And a couple days later, Stanley goes out looking for him.
Yeah, and he's such a good friend.
All the counselors have joked that there's nothing out there. Like, you can't run away because you're not going to survive. And Stanley's very heroic. He goes out there looking for Zero, and they find each other. And their camaraderie, their love for each other, and friendship.
They help each other survive.
They help each other. And throughout the course of the book, what's really revealed is that the warden is a descendant of the Walkers. And the reason they've been digging holes this whole time is because Kiss and Kate Barlow apparently buried her outlaw treasure in this town somewhere. And that's a memory that's been passed down through the Walkers for generations. And now here's the warden kind of having these kids try to dig up artifacts, try to find this treasure. And it just so happens that before Stanley and Zero ran off, Stanley did find a little bit of the treasure. He has a sense of where it is. And Stanley and Zero, they go out to the desert, they survive, they become friends, and they decide to go back, get the treasure, and try to kind of become free. And they do just that. They end up winning in the end. They find the treasure. They're threatened by the counselors, but just in the nick of time, kind of a lawyer and the attorney general arrive, and they're going to save Stanley and Zero. And good really wins in this book. Like you said, we don't really get a wrap up with sort of the racial component, but especially in terms of the masculinity component, we even see one of the boys who had been a very sort of posturing, harsh kind of character throughout the book. As Zero and Stanley are leaving with the lawyer and are going home, he goes up and kind of gently tells Stanley, "Will you tell my mom that I miss her?" or something along those lines.
Yeah, and you correctly pointed out that he was the character like that made fun of Stanley for writing to his mom and having letters from his mom.
Yeah, so it's a really sensitive, soft, sweet ending that shows that exactly what you said, that sensitive masculinity really has a place in this world, and really it can end well, and Stanley ends a very happy boy.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, and that he also...
We love Stanley.
We love Stanley so much. He's so pure. Yeah, and that he finds his strength through... throughout it, he doesn't really have to harden. He just becomes strong, and I really love that. And I remember Peter asking you off mic earlier, like, if you... because I'm a girly girl. I've said this before on this podcast. Like, we didn't do a lot. Like, some of this book is it's very boy heavy. A lot of boy culture in this book.
Boy culture.
Yeah, like a lot of like physical.
What does
bullying.
boy culture mean to you? Physical bullying.
Physical bullying, like weird nicknames, and like like this posturing, this weird like won't admit that like they miss their mom sort of culture for like, middle school, middle grade boys. And I asked you like if that was your experience, and you said that you were more of a Stanley. Like, do you want to talk about that?
It's so funny. I just had a phone call with my mom recently, and I think I told you this, where she made this comment that was like, one of the things that has always been really lovely about you, Peter, is that you always looked out for that kid on the playground who had no one to play with and played with them. And I think in that sense,
so
like, I really would be the boy that like looked out for Zero and was like, oh my gosh, like no one is playing with this boy. Like he's getting bullied, and try to make a difference and try to reach out.
Yeah.
And yeah, also at times be the one among the group who was brave enough to be sensitive, even among all the posturing. And
where do you think that comes from for you? So I think for Stanley, it does come from ultimately the love that he grew up with.
I think for me, I've always been an intelligent kid.
Yeah.
And there was just a baseline level of intelligence that I almost knew that like all this posturing and boy culture sort of toxic stuff you described was not helping us.
Wise child.
Yeah, I just kind of knew. And of course I participated and I played into it in the extent that it is kind of necessary.
Yeah. It always fascinates
socially,
me, like,
culturally.
Yeah, it always fascinates me how, like, whenever I had, I went to an all-girls high school, and then when I got around boys, I had a lot of male friends in college, and it was really interesting to see how they would act with me, if it was just me and a couple of girls, or like a mixed group, versus how they were with a lot of men, like how they performed masculinity almost for each other.
It's so different. Like, I know plenty of men, including myself at times, who have really only felt comfortable opening up to their female friends and have sought female friends with like women for that reason.
Yeah.
It's tough, but I think my story really is similar to Stanley's in that like I am becoming and have become so comfortable in my sensitivity as a man and being a sensitive man, and just knowing that like that's who I am, and I really can't change that.
Yeah. And you also have a lot of, well, I guess maybe you always have, but particularly now what I've noticed about you is that you have friendship with other men that is intimate, like platonically intimate and sensitive, and like there's not this weird, I don't know, like almost homophobic, like just kind of being afraid of their own fragile masculinity.
Absolutely.
There's not, I don't really get that vibe from you.
I think homophobic is fair. I think that's a fair characterization. And there is a lot of that, especially among teenage boys growing up.
Yeah.
And yeah, me and my friends were learning how to model being a sensitive and intimate man in relationships and friendships, just in the world, because being a teenage boy in this world does not teach you how to do that, at least in this culture.
No.
There's other cultures where sensitivity as a man is actually celebrated. Not in the American teenage boy culture. Oh, man. Couldn't really get further from it, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's also, we've talked about this a lot in this podcast, how we ultimately have modeled ourselves a bit after the generations that came before us, and the authority figures that we're presented with, like, our teachers or our parents. And yeah, I think that a lot of people talk about how they never have seen their dad cry, or if they've only seen their dad cry one time.
Yep. I know exactly the time I've seen my dad cry.
Exactly.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever seen my father cry. So it's just, like that's the model that you guys are working off of. And it's nice to know that like that model has changed a lot, because now you are coming of age, and like, if you ever have kids, you'll be a very different role model.
And shout out to all the queer and gay men who have been emotional and sensitive men and have really allowed that to be modeled.
Yeah, like have really pushed the boundaries of masculinity.
Yes, that's really helped me. Yeah. Straight men have some work to do.
Yeah, but you know what? This book is from, as you said, the 90s, and it provides excellent examples of what masculinity could be for a young boy, for like middle school boys. And this was,
it does. I'm glad you gifted this book to your nephew. I hope he reads it and enjoys it.
Yeah, for listeners, I bought this book for my 11-year-old nephew, and he doesn't really speak English that well, so we'll see if he reads it.
I already alluded to how terrible these camp counselors are. There's a lot of bad adult authority figures in this book. The judge who sentences Stanley, I'm not sure if we want to pull up the quote or if I just want to paraphrase, but he says something along the lines of, look at you, not only did you steal a pair of shoes, but you stole a pair of shoes that was going to provide food and money for the homeless. Like, Stanley is accused of stealing these like $5,000 pair of autographed shoes by this famous baseball player that was up to for auction to support homeless folks. And Stanley doesn't steal his shoes, but here this judge is looking at this 15-year-old kid, be like, look at you and how awful you were, and using this like guilt tripping. And
I think he's even younger than 15. I think he's in middle school.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah. And I know you and I were talking about this, and that this struck you in particular because it like guilt trip, like this is just a culture of shaming children, which I think is still ongoing. Like that's still something that we do. But that's something that struck a nerve for you in particular.
Absolutely. Just this idea of being a kid, and kids are kids.
Yeah.
And to bring in these high level concepts like, oh, you wanted to screw over the homeless, and like, where are these adults coming from? And there really is a pervasive culture of just shaming children. I've experienced it. I know you've experienced it.
Yeah, like assigning adult intentions to a child, I think is very odd. And it's weird because I think for a long time people didn't see children as full humans, and yet they assign like full human evil to them for some reason.
We've actually talked about this in psychology for where a long time the predominant view about child development was that they were miniature adults. It's called performantism or something like that. And it's
weird.
It's this like long-standing view that they were literally, and you think about these classical paintings that have like babies with just like,
oh my God,
adult
creepy
faces.
Jesus.
Yes. It's kind of in that tradition. But yeah, and I think I see it like all the time just out in the street. Like when I encounter families and I encounter adults just talking to their children in a very shaming way.
Yeah.
I just upstairs from where we are now, I won't reveal the secret location of our podcast studio. There's a restaurant, and I saw this dad drag his kid out, and basically accuse his kid of he was like 7 or 8, and it sounded like he was acting out at the dinner table with his friends, and he accused his kid of doing it to embarrass him, and again, just kind of adult insecurities, shaming children, playing out against children. We gotta protect kids. We gotta do better.
Yeah, 100%. I would say that judge who assigns this like nefarious intention that Stanley supposedly has of like stealing from the homeless and hating homeless people, like that judge 100% has his own baggage about like how much good he does to the world or not, and he's like assigning it to Stanley. And I think a lot of adults do that.
Yeah, they really put their baggage onto kids.
Yeah. We know that well.
With authority figures, it can happen in a really severe way when these folks have power, like this judge does. Oh my gosh, this guy is sentencing teenagers, and he's using this kind of language. So yeah, as you can hear, it definitely struck a chord with me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like authority figures are supposed to be here to protect us, and oftentimes the juvenile or the justice system in America is very opposed to the people they're sentencing, particularly if they're boys of color or girls of color. They're really harsh with them. You even see it with the quote unquote camp counselors in Camp Green Lake. They're just extremely just mean, just so mean to the children there. And they really are children, but they don't treat them like kids.
Our least favorite is Mr. Podansky.
Ugh.
We really didn't like him. Who
another gross individual
gives these kids this talk about like, just imagine what you can become when you get out of here. You've made mistakes in your past, but you can be whatever you want if you just work hard enough in the future. And at the same time is like just absolutely hates these kids and despises them. It's a very, very manipulative behavior.
Yeah, he even says something like, even you, Zero, you're not completely worthless, which is just like a really harsh and heartbreaking thing to say to a child.
So harsh. And you know what just occurred to me when you were talking about boys of color is we do get a little bit of a racial reconciliation in this book because Stanley is white and Zero is black, which we didn't discuss at first. And that's part of the story. And I don't know if that we'll get into all of it in this podcast, but there's a lot of like generational storytelling that happens here where Zero is a descendant of
Madame
Zeroni, who is someone from the past, and then Stanley's great-great-grandfather knew Madame Zeroni, et cetera, and they sort of reconcile. And I don't know, what do you make of that? Does that mean much to you?
I mean, I think that it can. I think again, this book is a good example of like what we could hope for and what our world could be. I think obviously it's simplifying a lot of complicated things, because like the world is really, it's not just this book. Like this book has characters that are a little flatter than like what the world contains. But like I think that what it's showing to me is that we can reconcile really deep divides that are racial or gender motivated, or whatever, by individual connection, and
With
which
love.
which is also like, for me, I'm a Buddhist. It's a Buddhist concept as well. I also think it's a Jewish concept. Like I think that that's the basis of a lot of faith, actually, is to have compassion and connection, and that's how we heal with each other. You cannot heal alone, which I think you and I talk about a lot on this podcast, of like healing together.
Yeah. And there are some good authority figures in this book that we wanted to talk about too.
Yeah, speaking of love, there are authority figures who display a lot of love.
Yes, and make a big difference for Stanley in his kind of healing reconciliation journey. His parents. It's very clear that they love him. They are a bit incompetent in the sense that they can't really help Stanley with his bully at school. They're not very functional
No, they're just
career-wise.
like too nice.
They're kind of a mess.
Yeah.
Their whole family's a mess. But man, do they love Stanley. And is it so clear that Stanley misses his parents?
Mm-hmm.
Stanley knows how much they love him.
Yeah, he's constantly thinking about them. Like he thinks about them and he misses them, and he thinks about, when he thinks he might die, he thinks about how they'll react, like because he cares about them. And there's a lot of evidence to the love of that. Like there's letters back and forth between them. His mom is extremely funny. He finds her funny. And they also have so much faith in Stanley. They know that he didn't steal those shoes. They don't even ask him. They don't question that at all. They just have absolute faith in their son.
It's really lovely.
Yeah.
But again, they can't help him get out of the situation. They don't encourage him to get a lawyer. They're like, "Oh, honey, you don't even need a lawyer. We know you didn't do it." That's not competent parenting.
They're not competent, so there's some room for them to grow. But I still think it makes a huge difference. Like that love makes a huge difference. And I'll pull up a quote that really shows that. And it also kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit. So the context of this quote is at the end of the book, Stanley and Zero have come back and kind of dug up Kate Barlow's treasure, and they're holding it. And they're covered with these poisonous lizards, and everybody's sort of watching them, trying to wait it out and see if a lizard will bite them so they can just steal the treasure for them. And for some reason, the lizards are not biting Stanley or Zero. So he is just, he's there in a hole with Zero in the dark, covered by poisonous lizards. And
he's on the brink of death.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what happens. Stanley tried to think about other things. He didn't want to die with the images of the warden, Mr. Sir, and the lizards etched into his brain. Instead, he tried to see his mother's face. His brain took him back to a time when he was very little, all bundled up in a snowsuit. He and his mother were walking hand in hand, mitten in mitten, when they both slipped on some ice and fell and rolled down a snow-covered hillside. They ended up at the bottom of the hill. He remembered he almost cried, but instead he laughed. His mother laughed too. He could feel the same lightheaded feeling he felt then, dizzy from rolling down the hill. He felt the sharp coldness of the snow against his ears. He could see flecks of snow on his mother's bright and cheery face. This was where he wanted to be when he died. "Hey, caveman, guess what?" said Mr. Sir. "You're innocent after all. I thought you'd like to know that. Your lawyer came to get you yesterday. Too bad you weren't here." The words meant nothing to Stanley, who was still in the snow. He and his mother climbed back up the hill and rolled down again, this time on purpose. Later, they had hot chocolate with lots of melted marshmallows.
Pauline, it's going to make me cry.
I know!
It's adorable.
It's like, I have so much yearning for this.
Me too. It's like loving incompetence.
Yes.
Like, they literally slip and fall down a hill together in the ice.
And then they laugh instead of cry.
They laugh and they love each other, and it's really beautiful.
And I just think that this shows that, like, how much that love that can create this like inner strength and this core in a person, and it behaves as a shield against the harshness of the world, the inevitable harshness of the world, because like the world is unjust and people can be mean to you, but Stanley is using basically his mom's protection, her love as protection.
it makes me think of Harry Potter when we talked about a mother's love, in that case being a literal shield that, kept him from being harmed by Voldemort. And now it's a shield when Stanley's on his facing death is this love from his mother. And like you said, you have yearning for it. I have yearning for it.
I think that's something that, I think the people who listen to this podcast might relate to this. I feel like some people don't get that love, and so they don't have that inner core that kind of forms so naturally and easily when you have love like that. When you grow up unconditionally loved and taken care of and just warmly held. And it's really hard to build that yourself. I mean, it's possible to build something like it, but it's really something that is kind of irreplaceable. And that's why I yearn for it. That memory, that reading of this memory just makes me feel like I'm missing something,
I totally agree. It's it's an easy love. It's a simple love. And for folks like us, maybe folks who listen to this podcast, it's hard to love easily and love simply like that.
I would say that both of us have a really a lot of strength now because of the healing we've done, but it was hard won. Versus someone like Stanley, he didn't even know he was growing it. It just happened, All right, Peter, it's time to talk about generational trauma.
We got to do it. It is book feels. It wouldn't be book feels without that. Okay. But this book is littered with it. We're not just looking for it. We promise.
It's literally about generations. So,
and they literally walk in their ancestors' footsteps, literally, at Camp Green Lake.
Which we'll talk about. I think I want to start with first, I think that there are a lot of examples in this book about what generations pass down to, future generations. And there's the good and the bad. And I want to start with kind of the stuff that hurts. We've talked about the warden and how she is a really unpleasant person and that she inherited this land from her grandfather. And she's also a pretty tragic character. I think the book does a good job in making her not completely one note. She's not a complete. I mean, she is evil, but there's a reason why she's like that.
Yes.
There's this one part in the book where the boys are digging and she's kind of looking vaguely at the holes and she says that her grandfather made her dig holes every day, even on Christmas, even on holidays, even when it was cold. Just imagine this. Yeah, imagine this maybe a 7-year-old kid because it sounds like she was quite young when he made her do this stuff and she did it her whole life because of him and then eventually her parents probably. That this is really a harmful narrative passed down from generation to generation that she needs to do this nonsensical thing.
And how devastating for her that Stanley, the rightful heir to this stolen treasure from his long past ancestors who were robbed by Kiss and Kate Barlow, actually finally finds the treasure and claims it as his own.
Yeah.
And this is what she's been searching for her whole life.
Yeah. And I think that shows exactly what a false narrative is. I think it's a really skillful way of depicting false narrative.
Absolutely.
It's something that she thinks belongs to her. She's doing this nonsensical thing of building holes or not building holes, digging holes and going insane slowly, just doing something over and over again and driving herself crazy and becoming increasingly mean and unkind and cruel to other people and becoming violent with other people. And then all that is built on something that was a lie, that it's something that didn't belong to her in the first place. And she never even gets to see what's in the briefcase.
In the end, she only suffers. It shows, you're right, it's a great analogy for false narratives. It also shows how persuasive these generations-long tales can be and how they just live in our bones.
Yeah. Is that something that you relate to at all?
My family, a little bit about my ancestry, my family. On my mom's side of the family, my grandpa was a Vietnam War veteran. And that is something that certainly could not be talked about. On my dad's side of the family, they were sort of a mixed immigrant family, grew up relatively poor, and they don't really talk about that experience either. And what really got passed down to me was just not being vulnerable, not talking about things from the past. We don't go there. We don't talk about things from the past. And It's still very persuasive for me. We had to pause this podcast so I could decide whether this is something I was going to share, right?
True.
Like breaking that rule. So yeah, I really think that lives in my bones. This
Yeah.
don't go hunting for the past. Don't go talking about our family. And yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's a weird, almost like a conspiracy of like, it's like this narrative, like, this is how we stay strong as a family, when really it's weakening the family from the inside.
Ugh.
Yeah, and it's like rotting the core of the family.
Yeah.
As we've talked about, like it's hard. We have difficult relationships within our families. As much as we love them, and as much as we have a relationship with them, it can be really hard. I relate to similarly, not necessarily about the Vietnam War, although I could talk about that for ages. Obviously, I'm thinking particularly of my mom's narratives. Like she was taught that men can behave a certain way, that like it's expected for husbands to hit their wives and to cheat on them. And as long as they like paid the bills and took care of the children financially, like that was acceptable. And she sort of like, that's what she grew up with. And that's also what she lived her life as. Except, my father was a lot scarier than my grandfather. And then also eventually ended up leaving. And even to this day, like Peter, you and I have talked about like the romantic advice our families give us, and it's always the same thing. For me, my mother just says, "Don't trust men," because that's what she grew up with. And so like she's encouraging me. She encourages me to get married and have children with a man that I don't trust inherently, because there's no such thing as a trustworthy man. And that's the narrative in her head. And very much like this book, with like the wardens, like what she is built her life on. It is a false narrative. It's completely empty. You're not walking on solid ground when at least I did not feel like I was walking on solid ground when I kind of believed what my mom said. And it's been as you said, it's very persuasive because it's also built into your head from a very young age. And it's been such a journey, and it's an ongoing journey to like really dismantle that narrative and try to live something new so that I can have a more fulfilling life and more fulfilling relationships.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, but obviously, like we don't want to be unfair. I think that people are complicated. Each generation comes with its own complications. They can pass down harmful narratives. I'm sure if I have kids, I will do the same. I don't think it's completely avoidable, but I think also they pass down other things, like they pass down the good.
Another thing that you really love that is passed down is this song that
Yeah.
both Stanley and Zero know a version of that has been passed down in their families.
Yeah, so let's give a little bit of background on that because we haven't talked about this. So the book begins with Stanley talking about his like no good great whatever grandfather, like a past ancestor who from whom all this bad luck of his family is supposed to have stemmed from. And he meets with Madame Zeroni, who's kind of like this Egyptian like mystic of some kind in Eastern Europe. And he's friends with her and takes her advice. But her one demand or one ask of him is for him to carry her up a mountain and help her drink from the stream in the mountain and sing this beautiful song to her. And he neglects to do that. I think he just forgets, and he moves to America. And so there's a curse kind of put on him and the rest of his family, supposedly. They just have bad luck forevermore. But this song that is from Eastern Europe is passed down to each generation, and it's translated into English. And so it's been in Stanley's family for generations. And on the other side, on Madame Zeroni's side, she has a son who's in the U.S., and he passes it down to the generations of his lineage. So Zero also knows the song, and it's a different version, like a slightly modified version of it because it's a different translation in English.
Yeah, so we have the Yelnats family version. If only the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree was just a little bit softer. While the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, he cries to the moon. If only.
Moon!
I don't know why I felt compelled to read it like that.
It's written that way.
It's written that way. And then we have this version at the end of the book that's for Zero's family. If only, the moon speaks no reply, reflecting the sun and all that's gone by. Be strong, my weary wolf, turn around boldly. Fly high, my baby bird, my angel, my only.
Aww.
Very sweet.
What I love about this is that like the curse is originally linked to this idea that Stanley's original ancestor did not sing the song to Madame Zeroni while carrying her up the mountain and to like help her drink from a stream. And in a beautiful parallel, Stanley carries Zero up a mountain, up this what they call God's thumb, and helps him, and gives him water, nourishes him, and sort of sings this like family lullaby to him. And the song is what heals the rift between generations. Like the beauty that's passed down from generation to generation is what heals them ultimately. I mean, obviously, it's an idealized version of what the world could be, but I think it's such a beautiful example. Like, it sets a great example for kids that, like, the good that your family gives you is what you should use in this world.
This is what we were referencing, or what I was referencing when I said that they literally walk in their ancestors' footsteps.
Yeah.
And what you said, the resilience and strength of this passed down song and what the generations have passed down, even though, like you said, generations past are complicated. What do you take away from your generations past as a strength, as something beautiful that stays with you?
Yeah, this isn't going to be a huge surprise to you, Peter, but Vietnamese people have a very rich history of poetry. A lot of it is spiritual poetry as well, and a lot of that stuff has kept me going. Like, there's a beautiful poem called For Warmth by Thich Nhat Hanh that I come back to over and over again. And that is from my heritage. Like, maybe it's not from my lineage, but it's from my heritage. And there's a lot of beauty in my family. My family is surprisingly has a lot of artists in it, even though like they're also all like engineers as their day jobs, and on the side they're like painters and writers, but they all have a creative side to them. And everybody in my family has this appreciation for beauty that I think was passed down to me. And I've been told that what people admire about me is my beauty, my ability to see the beauty in the world despite everything I've been through. And I do think that comes from my family.
Something I take away from my family is just the ability to laugh. My family loves to laugh. Laughter has always been a part of my family, and especially my dad's side of the family. One of our traditions is on New Year's Eve, one of my aunties on my dad's side, she has us all do a New Year's Eve parade around her house, and we all get little kazoos and party hats and march in a line and blow our kazoos, and it's so silly and so much fun.
That's so cute.
Yeah, my family really loves to laugh, and I love to laugh, and sometimes I forget how much laughter helps and how much it can heal.
I think that our families, as imperfect as they are, they have their ways of bonding. And I think that a lot of it is trauma bonding, which isn't pleasant. That is like kind of the hard stuff that they pass down.
Mm-hmm.
But some of it is like, yes, bonding through laughter, bonding through art and beauty. Like there was this one memory I have, I've told you about, of after my grandfather's funeral, my uncles and my aunts like kind of gathered around my mom's kitchen table, and we read this like bawdy Vietnamese poetry by this like really amazing poetess, like kind of like Canterbury Tales-esque, writing. And they read the Vietnamese version. I read the English version, and we would talk about the translation. And that's like such a beautiful moment of connection, and it's through art,
It's amazing.
Yeah. So
it's a real gift.
It really is. So, what do we do with all of this? I mean, I think that as we talked about, like generations can pass down to you like many things, and we have to hold them all. And I think that's not necessarily something Stanley is explicitly up against, but I do think that Stanley has to hold a more complicated world at the end of this book.
Absolutely. A lot has been passed down to him through his no good, bad luck great-great-grandfather, or whatever they call him. And you're right, we do see Stanley develop during this critical adolescent period, this period of transition that he's going through, amidst an unjust world and amidst all these contradictions. He arrives at Camp Green Lake, a shy, chubby, and kind of not confident kid.
Yeah. Like with no friends either, it
No.
seems like.
And he bonds with Armpit and X-Ray and Squid and these kids. And I think it's a really lovely moment. His first day, he digs his first hole, and he feels proud of it.
Yeah.
And he says something along the lines of, I know it's not, he knew it was nothing to feel proud of, but he felt proud anyways. Um, he kind of gets lost in this fantasy about finding justice for himself, where he reflects on these new friends he has in Armpit and X-Ray and Squid, and he thinks about his bully Derek back home and how he would just quiver if he saw him and his new friends now. And as the book goes on, and it's been a couple months, and Stanley and Zero end up fleeing into the desert, we actually learn that Stanley has become a lot stronger physically.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up, because the fact that I don't know, that he kind of finds a sense of self in that he understands that he is strong without having to harden himself completely. He just becomes like a stronger person. He understands that he is worth something. And I think that that's a really natural part of growing up. Just trying to find an inner sense of self, inner sense of strength, and some confidence. And I think, we don't want to encourage physical labor for juvenile delinquents.
Yeah.
But the fact that like he did it, like it started, the seed of it started when he accomplished something physical on his own, which is digging a really big hole. Like I think that's there's something really like symbolic about that.
What I really do relate to, and what we were just talking about, is this experience of getting distance from a problem,
Right.
and feeling at ease about it. Like, he gets distance from his everyday school bully, Derek, and Derek seems way smaller.
Yeah.
I think that's an experience I relate with. And I think this is what we actually want to wrap up with, is these feelings that Stanley expresses when he is on the top of the mountain with Zero, and he's reflecting on all he's been through over the last few months. He has this moment where he kind of says to himself, I'm glad those sneakers fell from the sky and I was accused of stealing them, because he's so grateful for all he's overcome, all he's endured, for his new friendship with Zero, and he feels true happiness. Do you have the quote, Pauline?
I do. I'm just going to read it out now. And I might skip around a little bit because it's a bit long. But so on the mountain, 2 nights later, Stanley lay awake staring up at the star-filled sky. He was too happy to fall asleep. He knew he had no reason to be happy. He had heard or read somewhere that right before a person freezes to death, he suddenly feels nice and warm. He wondered if perhaps he was experiencing something like that. It occurred to him that he couldn't remember the last time he felt happiness. It wasn't just being sent to Camp Green Lake that had made his life miserable. Before that, he'd been unhappy at school where he had no friends, and bullies like Derek Dunn picked on him. No one liked him, and the truth was, he didn't especially like himself. He liked himself now. He remembered what Zero had said a few days before. If Zero had just kept those shoes, neither of them would be here right now. As Stanley stared at the glittering night sky, he thought there was no place he would rather be. He was glad Zero put those shoes on the parked car. He was glad they fell from the overpass and hit him on the head. When the shoes first fell from the sky, he remembered thinking that destiny had struck him. Now he thought so again. It was more than a coincidence. It had to be destiny.
We love that quote.
So good. Yeah, so good.
And something we see the next night is Stanley is feeling afraid again.
Mm-hmm.
He's not sure what is going to become of him and Zero. And he notes that he tries to go back to that feeling of happiness and serenity that he had the previous night that you just described. And he can't. And he just feels afraid. And we love this because we have these epiphanies where we feel connected to ourselves, we feel confident, we feel lucky.
Yeah.
We feel like we can capture our destiny. And then we have moments where we just feel afraid and feel scared of life or worried. And we relate to Stanley.
Yeah, that's the human condition. And I think that's what part of growing up is understanding that and making space for that experience, and also like not trying to hold on to things too much, which again is very Buddhist of me to say, but and I'm going to say an even more Buddhist thing. This really reminds me of this time when I was at a silent meditation retreat, and I came back feeling just like really at peace with the world, really connected to the world, and really connected to myself. And and then that feeling went away after a while.
I think it's where we find true beauty, true peace. I think our society often teaches us that we should try to grasp onto happiness and, just buy that one more thing and then you'll be really happy.
Mm-hmm. Or like
just
do
have
this
more
to,
friends and then you'll be happy, or whatever it may be.
Or do this to protect yourself from unhappiness.
Exactly. And these books we love, these pieces of art we love, These experiences of our own that we've come to know and love are all about the both and.
Yeah. It's about how complicated life is and how beautiful that is, and also how heartbreaking that can be. It's about holding many things at the same time and not trying to hold on to all those things at the same time, like letting them flow through you like water flow around you. And I think that this is honestly, it's so funny. I doubt the author was trying to had these intentions of writing his book like this, but it's such a good example for kids that life will continue and the good and the bad will happen. And that's a really worthwhile life to have.
This book was about a lot more than digging holes.
It was really deep. Haha.
That was a good one.
You can find Book Feels wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at bookfeelspodcast or email us at bookfeelspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.